Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Aparuta de sangamatassa tawara. Yes, Odawanta Bamunchantu Satang. So this opportunity to reflect on Dhamma the way it is, and there's a background of silence, as our refuge. And so we always begin with this sense of looking inward rather than looking outward. So looking inward is, we're now just observing, being the witness or the observer of the body that's sitting here and the emotions that change according to conditions, the senses, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, all this. You're witnessing, not owning. So that ignorance, when we talk about ignorance of Dhamma, it's where we own the body as our separate self. And we see ourselves always as alone in a vast universe, in a very vulnerable form. So when we do this, then we suffer a lot, because if we are the human body, whether it be male or female, it's subject to all kinds of situations that we cannot control or predict. The more you think, when you're alone, sometimes when you're in society, you can feel part of a group or a sangha or a community or some kind of collective identity, which gives us a sense of meaning and purpose maybe to our lives as individuals. So there's notice that, in marriage and in family life and in relatives or when we go into tribal situations, belonging to a tribe, this sense of identity is not so lonely, because we're with other lonely people who may be all ignorant of Dhamma the way it is. So the witnessing, as I said previously last week, being the witness, the puto, is not a critical function. The witness doesn't criticize; it just knows the way it is at this moment, here and now. In this moment, for each one of us, it can only be this way. And maybe it's going to be very different from one individual to another. So if we start arguing about our feelings, we end up in a battle, because we can't expect two people to feel the same way at the same moment. That happens, but rarely. So when I gave the introduction, after the Namo Tassa, then the quote from the scripture, Aparuta de Sangama Tassa Taura, the gate to the deathless is open. I always, as I've said many times in my videos, that always inspired me. That there's, before I really investigated that particular teaching, it seemed like a kind of hopeless, despairing situation. Just me as a lonely individual in a vulnerable form in a vast universe. When you're thinking of that as the way it is, and then, I might survive into old age and then die. What's the purpose of life? What's it all about anyway? And so these words, the deathless, the gate to the deathless is open, suddenly gave me an insight. The deathless, I'm identifying out of ignorance with everything that dies, that changes. So that, you can see, is the cause of suffering, being attached to things that are unstable and changing, dependent on other conditions. We're at a time now here in the United States where the conditions are, very changeable, and there's so many predictions, death, doom, decay, and end of the world, and climate change, and political changes, authoritarian leaderships, and on like that. These are all speculations about the future that you hear from various people or see in the mass media, because most people have only their lonely, isolated selves to experience life with. And this is a time where mass media is kind of amazing, where we can tune in to what's happening in Russia and Ukraine and in Iraq and Afghanistan and in India and China and on like that. And then climate change is a rather frightening perception to hold to. So being the witness of this, where does fear arise in our lives? And it's about the future. The future is unknown, right? At this very moment, for each one of us, the future is uncertain. That's the way it is at this moment for all of us. Tomorrow is a perception in the mind, in the present moment. And anything could happen to, tomorrow or the next year or on like that. So this witnessing is just it's not saying anything wrong with predictions for the future or that we shouldn't think about the future, but it's the attachment to the future as something we fear or dread, or maybe we hope everything will go right. The Messiah comes and saves the world, or there's suddenly a significant change and we get wise leadership and intelligent governments that we can trust, and that is kind of the wishful thinking. And that's what it is in the present moment when we think about Armageddon or the end of the civilization or end of planet Earth. At this moment, what is that? It's a perception made out of words about the unknown. So when we worry, worry and anxiety and fear are common human emotions in modern society. So we go to psychotherapists or people try to figure out, there's something wrong with oneself because one is caught up in an obsessive worries, anxiety, and fears. And we take it very personally as something, that I shouldn't have that. I shouldn't be a worrier, or anxiety is my real problem. Fear, I have a lot of fears, irrational fears. There's something wrong with me. So we're taking this fear of the future as in a very personal way. But where does fear arise? It always arises in the present moment. It's not something that has any reality outside of the present moment in individuals' conscious awareness. Anxiety and worry, there's so much to worry about. When you have children, with family life, worrying about children, the future of your children, about the marriage itself in the present moment is like this. Worry is at this moment, if I'm caught up in worrying about the future, it's like this. That's witnessing. I'm not saying I shouldn't worry or there's something wrong with me because I worry a lot. It's really abiding in the pure conscious awareness, being the witness to what that you're looking at inwardly, not as some external kind of fear, like an elephant entering the vihara or something. That's something to be really frightened of in the present moment. But we can spend our lives in very secure situations with padlocks on the door and guard dogs and CCTV cameras and burglar alarms and booby traps and all the rest, and still be caught up in endless worry and fear about burglars or enemies or Satan or the devil or ghosts. So where do these perceptions arise? They arise in the mind, and we cling to them, either through being obsessed with worry or resisting it, taking it personally as some kind of weakness or problem with oneself, rather than witnessing that even fear of ghosts or political change or climate change in the future or family problems. It's not saying there's anything wrong with it, but we're observing. The witness doesn't criticize it. It just notices that it exists, it rises in the present, in the mind, and it ceases in the mind. So this is where wisdom begins to operate through these individual forms, universal wisdom. And the Buddha's teachings are, pointers at how to trust in universal wisdom through investigating the way it is. So the separateness, the fear of being left alone, of being rejected by society, and on like that. These are conditions that we create in the present moment according to other conditions, because we don't feel that way all the time. It changes when the conditions change. So the Buddha was very skilled in pointing to this conditionality that we're so deluded by, blindfolded by the way we cling to something that changes. Its very nature is unstable and untrustworthy. So that's why the First Noble Truth is about suffering, because it's the common experience of humanity everywhere on the planet that is that creates a sense of fear and anxiety and worry. Then we also have a lot of regrets about the past because we have a memory. So we have a lot of problems with guilt because we say things or do things, commit offenses or do something wrong or say something bad that we remember in the present. And then we can feel guilty about it. So that's not witnessing guilt. That's not being aware of guilt is like this. Remorse is like this. You're actually caught, you're clinging to it. And you can spend the rest of your life feeling guilty about doing something foolish when you were 16 years old that you can carry around with you for the rest of your life. If you're, if you're not aware of how to be the witness to life rather than the owner of it. So the witness doesn't own anything. It's pure conscious awareness, consciousness here and now that is uncreated. It's not male or female, it's not about right and wrong, but it's where these perceptions of right and wrong, male and female, arise and where they cease. So when they arise, we cling to them or we reject them, we resist them. So even resistance, trying to get rid of fear, trying to get rid of anxiety and worry, is a form of clinging to it. It's not wisdom that is operating through the tendency to want to get rid of something you don't like. So in this way, being the witness, the Puto, then you're seeing that all conditions that arise cease, and I encourage you to really see the value of seeing the cessation of conditions, also the arising of them, because that's the nature of phenomena. It's about birth and death. It's about death. It's about change. It's and these death and change and instability and fear and worry, anxiety, remorse, guilt, all come from thinking. And thinking words in any language, whether it be English or Pali, Sanskrit, Tibetan, whatever language we have, they're creations by human beings. They are phenomena. They arise and cease. So even the teachings of the Buddha are phenomena. So it's not about grasping the Buddhist teachings, but in using the Buddhist teachings to remind ourselves to be the witness to life as we experience it. So consciousness is not personal. So the body is in consciousness rather than consciousness inside the body. When we talk about the five khandhas, the body, the feelings, the memories, the emotions, and the sensory consciousness, these are all subject to change. like consciousness through the eyes or ears, nose, tongue, the thinking mind itself, or all that, consciousness operates through the body rather than the body. Consciousness is in the body. Consciousness itself has no body. It is immeasurable, but the physical forms, we tend to see it all in a very personal way. So this is why there's wars and quarrels and competitions and fears and desires that go on endlessly. And because we're caught in a vortex of change that's beyond our control, and we're trying to control it. We go become a hermit, go off to a cave in a faraway place and try to live our lives, away from the fears and problems of family or society. But if we still have this vision of ourselves as that I am this physical form, even in a cave, in a very silent place, the basic delusion, the basic ignorance still operates wherever, in cave or in the community. So I encourage you just to contemplate the shift that I'm alluding to, and the fact that the body is, all these bodies, this building itself, this sala, this monastery, the whole of New Hampshire and the rest of the United States is in the consciousness, rather than consciousness is in this person, that person. So consciousness then is unitive, because we've all these forms that we identify with, they've all arisen in the same consciousness. So the consciousness isn't something that we create out of ignorance, but is a natural state that we begin to recognize through the teachings of the Buddha that are pointing to it. Universal conscious awareness. Now when you begin to really trust in that and cultivate it, then you're no longer just a critic of life, of yourself, of the world, of the people you live with, the society you're a member of, the religion you identify with. You're no longer, caught in identifying with phenomena, but your true identity then is conscious awareness. This is how we realize that. And the absolute reality of Dhamma, consciousness is spontaneous. Dhamma is our refuge. We don't take refuge in consciousness, but in this tradition we take refuge in Dhamma. And what does that mean? So it's this identity with what is unsatisfactory and whose very nature is to change, identity with a physical form as it gets older, with its health, with its appearance. These can be endless forms of suffering by this ignorant attachment and identity with something you're not. None of you are ultimately that, what you think and believe in. But what you are ultimately is pure conscious awareness absolute reality, the Dhamma, and that's the end of suffering, the Nirodha, the third noble truth, when that begins to really no longer be a belief or a perception, but profound insight into your true nature. So how many of you would feel, what would you feel if I said you're all perfect? And then, you see yourself as with faults, with flaws, with you're old, or you're male or female, or you're transgender, or all these perceptions that you identify with are, is that really what you are? Is that, what you settled on as what you really are ultimately? Or what are you ultimately? And so enlightenment, when we talk about the deathless, is where we actually have insight into the end of conditions as we witness them, as we're the puto, the witness, that guilt arises, it's a condition, suddenly you're feeling guilty about something you did years ago, or yesterday, or a few minutes ago, and it arises. The puto is aware of it. It's like this. And then it ceases. And you notice, you pay attention to the cessation of the absence of guilt. And we don't tend to do that when we can carry guilt around as something we've got as a personal problem because we're very attached to the idea that guilt is my problem. But when we see it as just another condition that arises and ceases, it arises in consciousness and ceases in consciousness. And Buddha, knows the Dhamma, the deathless reality. So the deathless, try to imagine the deathless. Can you make an image of the deathless? You can make images that are impermanent, changing. Really explore your intellect. Can you create the deathless reality with words, with forms? And, in my experiments with this, I really spent a long time just practicing with the deathless, the uncreated, unborn, unconditioned, unformed. What is it? Because the Buddha in one of his suttas says there is the unborn, the uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. And I thought, what is it? What can that be? And trying to imagine the uncreated, unborn. You can't do it. You just use words like, prefaces that negate it. Unborn, according to the word born. So you realize your intellect is very limited to forms, to ideas, to conditions. No matter how well educated you might be, how many PhDs you hold from prestigious universities, that accumulated knowledge is not the deathless. You can't realize the deathless through thinking, through images, through concepts, through perception. So you can argue about ultimate reality according with words, metaphysical perceptions, with theology and philosophy, and we try to understand consciousness through analysis, through words, but not through awareness of what we're actually doing. So any of us, whether we're well educated or not, is not the point, is to trust in awareness. So the gate to the deathless is open. The statement of Paruta De Sangamatasa Tawara. And then it goes, Ye Sodawan Taba Munchantu Satang. Those who are listening, Sodawantas are listeners who hear this, trust in this. So it's like to investigate, to explore consciousness as you experience it, not to evaluate it in terms of right and wrong, true or false, but even superstitions, even nonsense, it still arises and ceases in consciousness. When you see the world is in consciousness rather than consciousness in the many forms, is that when you see that all the forms, the planet itself, the sun, moon, and stars, the whole universe is in consciousness. The forms here are in the same consciousness. It's not a consciousness that is just, according to individuals. So I remember years ago reading psychologists questioning about are dogs really conscious, or horses, and then it becomes ridiculous because the forms are different, so the mammalian forms or the insects or the birds, the amoebas, all the fish in the ocean in the same consciousness. How does that make you, how does that affect you? Just changing the perception of just noticing the difference and creating perceptions of approval or disapproval according to the forms, which we do out of ignorance, out of habit. But when we have that insight, wisdom, knowledge, that consciousness is universal, then we begin to understand the Brahma Viharas. They're not just intellectual exercises of thinking positively anymore, but real feelings of metta, or loving kindness, unconditioned acceptance of the way it is metta, rather than seeing metta as a kind of exercise through thought, or trying to feel universal loving kindness as some kind of personal emotion. So in moments when the conditions are right, we can feel a sense of love for all sentient beings, but that emotion arises and ceases if it's just based on clinging to words and perceptions, concepts, and particular situations. And then you can lose it just by somebody being rude or nasty or inconsiderate. Suddenly, you don't feel love for them. You can feel anger and you want to reject them, get rid of them. But the Puto witness is aware when the forms of metta that are based on thoughts, they arise and cease, just like the anger or resentment or hostility that arises and ceases. Where metta comes from universal conscious awareness, it's unconditioned. Buddho isn't, as I said, isn't judging, making value judgments about anything. So he's not trying to love everybody, everything in the universe. It's just natural because that is the way it is. It's spontaneous. It's not created. And the other three, the compassion, you begin to feel compassion for others because they suffer needlessly, caught in the web of samsara and the changing conditions with seeing no way to escape or possibilities other than death or change or old age, sickness, loss of loved ones, wars, and on like that. Then we get caught up with the worry, anxiety, and fears that are created and arise and cease. So when we talk about going to the source, we investigate, we call it Dhamma Vichaya, getting to the source, investigating. This is what it really means practically, is being a witness to the way it is. All conditions are impermanent. Sape sankhara anicca. That's not just some kind of Buddhist doctrine. That's when you observe this yourself. You're not asked to believe that, but it's encouragement to see, is there anything permanent? Any condition? Anything that's permanent that we experience through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, feeling with our body. And then we investigate. And we begin to be aware of the incessant, relentless changingness that we experience through these forms, and the insight begins to, why hold on to them? Why identify with something unstable, uncertain, when your true nature is unconditioned, unformed? So in terms of, is Dhamma a condition? The word itself is a condition, some human-made word. But absolute reality is unconditioned, unborn, uncreated, unformed. And that's what when we take refuge in Dhamma, we're beginning to realize our true refuge is not in these delicate mortal forms, but in ultimate absolute reality, which we call Dhamma, the truth of the way it is. And so, and the Buddhist teachings are kind of brilliant signposts to this. They're always pointing at the deathless reality that we are. But we can study Buddhist scriptures and still be caught in clinging to the words that we believe in rather than the actual witnessing of the way it is. And this is what I really appreciated when I met Luang Por Chah in Thailand years ago. that his teaching was an endless pointing at the way it is rather than telling me how it is, preaching at me what Buddha taught and what we should treasure and believe in, but using our lives through the experiences that we have through these forms for witnessing the relentless changingness of the forms that we identify with. Now, this is quite a revolution because, we're brought up to see everything very personally. And we see the world in a very personal way of approval or disapproval. It's like refugees, foreigners, immigrants. We can see, in different races. We can see in terms of biases or personal preferences or conditions that we've acquired from our families, from our background. And so we can rebel against that. Like they wanting to not be racially prejudiced or biased according to gender, or have views and opinions about lesbians and gays and things like that. These are all conditions that we've acquired. So these are very much in the consciousness of present-day Americans, these terms. Climate change, LGBTQ perceptions, abortion, Nazism, fascism, communism, nationalism are all perceptions that are common to all of us, whether it's in a positive or negative way, that affect our lives. And we tend to act on these biases, creating even more problems, more things to resent or fear or feel guilty about. So the Buddha was pointing exactly to the cause, the source. Suffering is a creation out of ignorance. Our true nature is a Dhamma, our refuge, that doesn't change. That makes no value judgments. So it's metta, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy. So we experience joy in the beauty of life, rather than just trying to cling to it and then grumble when the beauty ceases. The goodness of others comes naturally, spontaneous, not some kind of creation of the mind. Upekkha, equanimity, is true awareness. Awareness, conscious awareness is silent and equanimous. So, but no matter how much wisdom you have in regard to the Buddha's teachings and how enlightened you might be, we still feel the changes of life, the loss of loved ones, the misery that oftentimes we read about or hear about, starvation and wars and bloodshed and corruption and all the rest. We can still feel compassion but it's not a created compassion. It's not like personal me trying to feel compassionate. So the Brahma Viharas are spontaneous from the pure state of conscious awareness. They're not created out of ignorance. So someone like Luang Por had great compassion. And you could feel that, when I met him. He was trying to share his wisdom with as many people that would be interested. And he's always talking about bhati bhata, or practice. So he emphasized that Wat Pah Pong, his monastery in Ubon, Thailand, was, we called it Wat Batibat. It's a practicing monastery, meditative. He's emphasizing meditation. Because Buddhism can't just be very, oriented to scholarship, to scriptural learning, to learning Pali or Sanskrit. And it can be just another subject in a university. Buddhist studies. At universities, nothing, I'm not criticizing that, but if it remains strictly on the study level, it's still intellectual knowledge that you acquire rather than insight through investigating, through Dhammavichaya, through Sati, Dhammavichaya, investigating. So you realize this for yourself. This is not just believing what some wise teacher like Luang Por Chah says, and just said Luang Por Chah said this and Luang Por Chah said that, and so we can quote these teachers. So we have a memory, so we might remember what he taught and how he said things and how he lived his life. But bhati bhata isn't about trying to emulate teachers, but having the confidence, the certainty of realization yourself. No matter what you think you are as a person, like in my personality, my conditioned personality, it doesn't see me as enlightened in any way. Because my personality isn't enlightened. So, you can't, when I try to think about am I enlightened or not as a person, this just raises doubts because that clinging to this sense of a separate self as a person, as a separate person, can't conceive, can't realize ultimate reality. So when Luang Por Chah emphasized bhati bhata, this is the Pali word for meditation practice, bhavana. And then we put our trust in awareness in which we realize this for ourselves. It's what they call bhajitang veti dapo inuhi, to be realized individually through wisdom. So this wisdom is not personal, it's universal. It's available to every single human being on the planet. It's not like we're special, gifted, spiritually gifted individuals. We can believe in such perceptions, but those are created words and just a form of personal identity. So people have asked me about my past life. And, they wanted, what was I before I became Robert Jackman or born into the Jackman family? 88 years ago. And I haven't the slightest clue. But I can create images. I've had kind of perceptions of, kind of mystical experiences before I came across Buddhism, what I call mystical experience. But I didn't have the wisdom to understand them. So I took them personally. And I have mystical experiences in the past. And then people say, "Oh, you have a lot of barami, a lot of accumulated virtues to become enlightened in the present." And all this is part of a scenario of self, separate self. Because the body doesn't get enlightened, the emotions aren't enlightened, the thoughts are not enlightened in themselves, they're conditioned. But enlightenment is a true nature that we begin to realize through reading the signposts and investigating in this way with Puto, knowing Dhamma, absolute reality, that is no longer just a belief or taken personally, but awakened to reality itself, to Dhamma, to our real refuge. So in Thailand, many people believe that this monk is an arahant or that monk isn't an arahant, or, society goes around looking, you get more merit by giving food and dana to an arahant than to a Buddhist nun, or all kinds of perceptions, about to gain the most merit personally, an arahant is the ultimate, opportunity. So you can go around different monasteries throughout time looking for arahants and making merit. It's not wrong. It's not like I'm saying it's wrong. But it's not really understanding the heart, the real essence of Buddha Dhamma. Is still operating on a personal, I want to make merit. I want to get merit for my next life. And so that's a perception that arises. It's very cultural in Thailand. Because in America, I wasn't brought up with that perception. The perception I was brought up was that I was born a sinner. So you get the idea that, you're basically damaged when you're born. And how does that affect you? How does that affect your life? When you see yourself, there's always something you've got to fix, something wrong with you personally, because you were born in sin or damaged, and your nature is a sinner, and you hope to be forgiven by God, to get rid of the sins, to forgive the sins. And so much of religion can be around trying to pacify God and try to be virtuous, make merit, and this is praiseworthy, to be virtuous, to be moral, but it's still conditioned. It's still phenomenal. So what is above the conditions, what is beyond, is Dhamma. And so in the Pali tradition, we take refuge in Dhamma, not in some hoping the next life we have a better rebirth. And in the Bhatipata, if we do hold it, we hope in the next life I'm born in the Deva realm Puto knows that's a perception that arises and ceases in the present. It's a condition. It's not reality. It's not what we are. So you realize that you're not anything. Dhamma is not a thing. When we use the word Dhamma, it's not, you can't find it as a thing. Apparent here and now, timeless, come and see. It's what do what is it that you don't create or think about? And you begin to really take refuge in Dhamma, in awareness. Sati, sampajanya, mindfulness, wide open awareness, not just aware of objects, but of space, of ultimate reality. And consciousness, Dhamma, consciousness, space, and the four elements, earth, fire, water, and air, all of them, the space, the earth, fire, water, and air, all conditioned phenomena depends on consciousness. Without consciousness, there's no space, there's no earth, fire, water, and air, there's no bodies, there's nothing. So it ends up as a kind of nothing, a nihilism, annihilationism. But the Buddha made it very clear he wasn't preaching about annihilationism or nihilism, but about the deathless. The gate to the deathless is open. Those who are listening trust in this. So I offer this for today's reflection.